Thank you for being here, and also thank you to those joining us online. I'm Gloria Palmer, the Executive Director of Green Mountain Academy for Lifelong Learning. Tonight's program is the fourth event in the Vermont Conversation series, and I would like to thank the Keeling Family Foundation for sponsoring the series. Don and V are in the audience, so thank you very much. It is our plan that the series will continue in 2025 and delve into more of the issues so important to our small state. Next up, though, in the GMALL calendar, we have the Manhattan Short Film Festival, probably one of my favorite annual events. 10 short films produced in 9 countries will be screened in 2 locations. On September 28th, we will be at the Arlington Common, and on October 5th at Burlington Academy. Both showings are at 7 p.m. Tickets are $15 and can be purchased online on our website, or you can pay at the door. Thank you to SVAC for hosting us here in the Arkell Pavilion. Also a thank you to GNAT-TV for running the live stream and videotaping this talk, as they do many others throughout the year. I ask that you silence your cell phones. Our guest speaker served as the director of the Vermont State Police, police chief in Manchester and Rutland, the executive director of the Vermont Police Academy, on the leadership team at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and as the interim commissioner of the Vermont Department of Corrections. He owns and operates JW Leadership Consulting, which focuses on leadership development, executive searches, and collaborative criminal justice reform. He currently serves as the primary consultant to Governor Phil Scott's Public Safety Enhancement Team. Please join me in welcoming Colonel James Baker.
Gloria, thanks for that introduction. Thanks for folks coming out tonight. I want to level set just a little bit before I start. I don't consider myself an expert in the area of addiction, mental health, or any of the other underlying issues that are accelerating the opiate crisis in Vermont. What I will tell you is that since 1985, in one form or another, in my professional career, I have dealt with this issue. So starting in 1985, I was working undercover for the state police for about 3.5 years. I saw that version of the opiate crisis back then. It wasn't a crisis. It was really hard to find heroin. What we saw a lot was powdered cocaine, crack cocaine. It was hard to find heroin back then. There was some diversion of pills back then, 1985, but not what we saw coming in the late 80s into the 90s and the 2000s. And fast forward to, I currently serve as the consultant to Governor Phil Scott's Public Safety Enhancement Team, which I'll talk a little bit about towards the end of the presentation. So as I talk tonight, really what I'm drawing on is a history of how we got to where we are in Vermont and across the country, and my experience. And some of that's going to draw upon what my opinion of stuff is about where we are and the struggle that we face. The trouble with the opiate crisis is that it doesn't touch everybody, but it touches parts of your life that you're not even aware of. Talk to an educator. Talk to somebody that works in preschool. Talk to store owners and businesses in certain communities. You may not see it from where you sit, but it's very subtle, the damage it's doing to the social fiber of our communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing is, I'm going to talk about certain communities tonight. I'm going to show you a video in a minute that was on Channel 3. Focuses on Burlington. But I want to just set the record straight. There's a lot of chatter in the state about Burlington and the impact of this opiate crisis in Burlington. Burlington's not the only one struggling with this. I've worked in Springfield, Bennington, and Brattleboro. We're about ready to start work in St. Johnsbury. There's groups meeting across the state, such as in Morrisville, Vermont. People probably don't even know where Morrisville is. Small little town in Moyle County in the middle of the state. Seeing an increase in social behavior and criminal activity that is scaring the community. So when I show a video about Burlington, I don't want to be calling Burlington out, because it's not the only community that's facing the challenge. Here's what I hope we come away with tonight. I hope you have some understanding when I get done speaking about the view of the International Drug Distribution Network. And I'm not going to give you a lecture on cartels and how they're getting drugs into the country. We'll touch on that a little bit. But you need to understand that what you see in the communities in Vermont is a direct reflection on the business model of these organized crime groups that operate much like Amazon. Their distribution networks look very similar, strategically placed around the country where they can move product and move product quickly into communities like Manchester, Vermont. Bennington. I live in Arlington. They look very similar. The business model of the illicit drug trade. I want to touch on that a little bit to better understand. The origins and the phase of the current opiate crisis. Where did it start? Opiates were discovered in 1864. 1864. China and Britain went to war over opiates shortly thereafter. So this issue, 1928, the United States government formed a committee to take a look at trying to find a pain medication that wasn't addictive. 1928. And here we are in 2024 dealing with some of the same. We'll talk a little bit about the accelerators. I'm going to show you a couple slides that have data on them, and you will distinctly see how around the time of the pandemic, this issue accelerated. It was the perfect storm, but it also had a very close tie to strategic marketing by criminal groups. Their product is important to only the people who are addicted. And the more folks addicted, the more for the demand, the more for the product. It's not a complicated, you'll hear me say this several times tonight. This business model is not complicated. It's supply and demand. And if you spend all your time focused on supply and not on demand, you don't have a balanced approach to trying to deal with some of the damage being done in communities. I talked about the accelerators of the crisis, health, safety, and financial impacts on our cities and towns in Vermont. The ebb and flow of public policy on addiction. From where I told you since 1985, my professional life has touched substance use disorder in one way or the other. And it's frustrating to see the swings we go through. And I'm seeing it again now. People get frustrated, they throw their hands in the air, and we swing from the left to the right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about what I believe is the answer moving forward, which is the intersection of public safety and public health. So I'm going to show you a video. But before we do that, how many people here, and again, if you feel uncomfortable doing this, it's easier to do this in a larger crowd. I warned Gloria that no one wanted to come listen to Jim Baker, but anyway. How many people here either have somebody in your immediate family, a friend of yours, somebody that you know in the community that has either got someone currently associated with them, 6 degrees of separation, that is currently struggling with addiction, or someone that you know has lost someone to an overdose, or someone who's in treatment, someone who's relapsed from treatment. How many folks does that fit? Yeah. Can you put your hands up again? 8 people. And the stigma of having someone, this is my wife over here, so I have to call her out anytime I get a chance. We have someone that was fairly close to us that passed away. They were the godmother of one of our grandchildren. Incredibly talented young lady. Incredibly talented young lady. Struggled for a bunch of years in and out of addiction. And then lost that battle. And the stigma that comes along with it, which we'll talk about a little bit more. As you listen to this is some of you may have seen this news story a week ago or so. This is a pastor at a church in Burlington talking about the struggle. Listen to her personal struggle being a minister but the social chaos that the addiction issue is driving for her in this community.
Now impacting places of worship. Tonight we investigate how a pair of churches have come under siege. We first told you about issues at the First Congregational Church on South Lewski Avenue last fall. The problem has grown to encompass the Methodist Church right next door and extends across the street to the city parking garage. A triangle of trouble that has church leaders desperate for help.
We'll find more garbage over here, I'm sure.
Frustration on the front steps of Burlington's 150-year-old First Methodist Church.
But this is private property, so I'm going to ask you to leave.
The church towers over the Queen City and is struggling with a towering problem. This place of worship is now a place of worry, too.
No one who has ever sat in these pews would have thought that we would have had a humanitarian crisis on the lawn. This is filled to the brim with needles, used needles in here.
Pastor Kerry Cameron says drug use, drug dealing, homeless camps, and people trespassing now surround the sanctuary.
So we are definitely under siege. This is a growing issue. It has not been like this at all.
The Marketplace Garage sits alongside South Lewski Avenue, but across the street is the First Congregational Church. Across Buell Street is then the Methodist Church, creating a triangle of unwanted activity. And now the Methodist Church, they're taking action.
Where is the accountability? We're being asked to set up cameras, put up fences, and do all these things. Where do we say, okay, it's time for you to step up to the plate and help yourself? But the drug is so...
The pastor says the
I
church
don't even know what the word is.
welcomes folks struggling with addiction, but their guidance has been mostly rejected.
It's very difficult to be showing compassion when we don't receive the compassion in return.
Instead of accepting her help, she says the church property has been stolen or destroyed. And then there's the mess: trash, needles, and human feces.
Oh, here's a needle right here. And I hate picking up this stuff because I feel like I'm enabling them.
And the crimes continue to escalate.
We've been threatened, that our community would be killed. I had a knife pulled on me.
A window into the growing problem at the church, where they're asking Jesus for help.
He would be so sad. I am sad. Every day that I walk in here, I am sad. I'm sad for them. I'm sad for our church. And it's like the city has got to come through. I'm sorry, but it has been a nightmare.
A nightmare she can't wake up from. Just moments after this man shoots up in front of us,
Here we go.
cops roll up and arrest him. We're told it's for a warrant.
Thank you, police.
Dozens of others remain unfazed and stay put. The pastor, grateful for police on this day, but says they don't always respond, and kicking people off the property doesn't always work.
This is sacred ground. I don't think Jesus does. I don't think you know what Jesus does. I don't.
The church is now issuing trespass notices because of the ongoing trouble.
I never in my wildest dreams thought I would do that. We're a church. We're supposed to love. We're supposed to, welcome.
The bad behavior on Buell Street, the neighboring church's lawn, and the nearby parking garage leaves some neighbors changing their behaviors.
Our friends walk around sometimes. I walk about the middle of the street.
Nolan Kurtz found this needle while walking by.
It's not that unusual around here.
He says he feels bad, but knows to keep his distance.
It's a pretty sad situation, but we kind of try to avoid that street.
Others call for more compassion.
We do need to help these people, and this is not like this. I think this is a systemic issue.
They are frustrated.
Police say they're playing whack-a-mole. The open drug use fixed in one spot just pops up elsewhere, from City Hall Park to the library, and now here.
And we go there as often as we can, as well as the Marketplace Garage, to ensure that open air unlawful activity is met with a response.
But we need to work together.
Pastor Cameron continues to take matters into her own hands.
Well, we've tried to be patient. Let's have these kinds kinds of conversations. But it's got to be a two-way street.
Inviting this man, who he says uses drugs, to a Sunday service,
Plus.
hoping for change.
It was a seed.
That's the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal. Plant a seed, and hopefully it'll take root.
In her most recent community safety report, Mayor Emma Mulvaney Stanton points to an increase in law enforcement presence and security in the area around the two churches and the Marketplace Garage. This video, shot over the weekend, shows police ordering people camping between the two churches along Buell Street to remove their tents. Meanwhile, the Methodist pastor says she's doing what she can to help, including offering free meals in exchange for a conversation. She says it's had little success.
So let me further level set to better understand nationally what the picture is. So this is the national opiate-related overdose fatalities. This is anyone who is 15 years or older that dies of an overdose. So when you take a look at this, nationally the overdose fatalities increased since 2012. You can see the slide bar going up. But I want you to take a look at the last three bars to the right. If you can't see that slide, it's 20, 21, and 22 at the height of the pandemic. And as we started coming out of the pandemic, and they're predicting that in 23, 107,543 people will die in this country of overdoses from opiates. Primarily now fentanyl, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes. When you take a look at this slide, and I'm trying to level set for you to understand the impact of fentanyl, which we'll talk about, the synthetic third round of the opiate crisis in a minute. But when you look at this slide, it'll show just 20 and 22, from 20 to 22, the mixtures of drugs that were killing people in the country. And if you look at the bottom, this is a legally made fentanyl. Yes, heroin was responsible. Cocaine had a role in the deaths. Prescription opioids had a role in the deaths. Methamphetamine had a bit of a role in the death. But when you look at the bottom line, this is the synthetic version of heroin that is now being tracked, not only in the country, but here in Vermont. This is Vermont data. So when you take a look at this, we are decreasing the number of folks that are dying in Vermont from opiate overdoses. Primarily, the drug supply is toxic, contains primarily fentanyl now. When individuals think they're buying heroin, they're buying synthetic fentanyl. 30 times more potent than heroin. Enormous problems as a result of it. And you can see that with this slide, as you look at the bar goes up, the same thing happened in Vermont. As the pandemic was unfolding, homelessness, mental health issues, and then the market got hit with the fentanyl, we saw a very big uptick in the deaths in Vermont. So you can see from 18, where we were at 130, peaked at 244 in 2022. And they're starting to go down. Now, that you should say, well, that's a victory. Somebody's child, husband, wife, significant other has been saved and they haven't died of an overdose. But really what you're seeing is that we've really focused on harm reduction to individuals by putting out in the communities life-saving techniques such as Narcan. There's not a police department, EMS squad. We are now putting Narcan vending machines in communities. That's what's starting to have an impact. I would present to you that more than likely we're not seeing less drug use, but we're seeing the ability to intervene in situations to save people by using the techniques that are out there. I put this slide in because this is hospital visits to ERs in Vermont by 10,000. So for every 10,000 visits, Bennington County from October 1st of last year till now, about 2 weeks ago, has seen 9.1 emergency room visits for overdoses per 10,000 visits. So when I first looked at this slide, I thought to myself, that can't be. It's got to be per 1,000. But I went back and checked with folks at the health department. It is 10,000. So you would think when you look at this, and I'm making a point here about putting this situation into context. So if you take a look at this, you would think, 9.1 visits per 10,000? That's not that bad. But here's the deal. If you talk to your local EMS squad, or people that are on the front lines of this out in the community, they're responding to overdoses every day. People are getting hit with Narcan. They're coming to because they're literally on their deathbed. They're coming to and then refusing treatment and transport to hospitals. So I'm suspect of that data being a measurement of how successful we're being in Vermont. Am I making sense to you, I hope? Okay. Continuing the level set. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of the opiate crisis. I already mentioned in 1864, for the first time, they took the opium plant, and transformed that into morphine as a painkiller. Now, I'm not going to spend all this time from 1864 to 2024. I'm not going to bore you to death with that. But it's important to understand that. This situation started to escalate when prescription medication and black tar heroin, unrelated in distribution and unrelated in marketing, started to make its way into the United States mainstream. Two great books, story told by Sam Quinones in Dreamland and Beth Macy in Dope Sick. Two incredible books. Quinones followed the pharmaceutical Purdue Pharma and followed the movement of OxyContin into our mainstream and how that led to the opiate crisis. Beth Macy spent her time going through Appalachia and visiting communities where the pharmaceutical medication devastated the communities. Devastated. And so the picture started unfolding. 1996, Pharma Purdue released OxyContin. The whole idea was it was a slow reaction. It was viewed as dealing with pain. And look, this is well-documented information. They have paid enormous fines on 2 occasions for their false marketing of the drug and the damage it's done to communities. A very aggressive marketing, and I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. It also was kind of, at the same time, a shift in the way the medical community looked at pain management and end-of-life care, where pain management by JACO and the Veterans Administration became a vital sign. Anybody been to the hospital or doctor and you're suffering from pain and the doctor says to you, what's the pain on a scale of 1 to 10? Anybody done that, right? That was JACO saying that pain is the equivalent of breathing and bleeding. Now we can look back on this and say, what were people thinking of at the time? And I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on this in a minute. At the same time, well-organized Mexican drug groups were starting to market black tar heroin. Now, it doesn't matter if you were doing undercover investigations and you bought black tar heroin, you knew it was Mexican-based. If you bought white powdered heroin, you knew it came from South America from another location. Doesn't matter here in this conversation. But Pharma Purdue started pushing medication, and Mexican drug cartels started moving powdered heroin. Cartels were focused on the West Coast at the time. Pharma Purdue was looking across America and across the world to market their product. And I'm going to talk about this article in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980 that talked about addictions rare in patients treated with narcotics by Dr. Herschel Gick. This led to a very aggressive marketing campaign for Pharma Purdue. So let me just, I'm skimming across the top here. I'm not going to spend, as I said, from 1864 to 2024, but let me skim across the top of the timeline of how we find ourselves in this situation right now with now the third rendition of this opiate crisis, fentanyl. Morphine, as I said, distilled from opium plants, 1864. 1980, the letter from Porter Jick saying that narcotic pain being treated was not addictive. Now remember, in 1980, if you read up on this, in 1980, they didn't have the quantitative and qualitative abilities to do research that we have today. They didn't have computer programs. They didn't have databases. It was all done kind of in the old-fashioned way. And they came to this conclusion that narcotics-based medication was not addictive. So this is 1980. That journal piece kind of sat there for a few years until Farmer Purdue got their hands on it. 1986, Dr. Kathleen Porter and Russell Portnoy advocated for opiate for pain control. So the medical community started talking about, we need to do something about pain. And they started advocating, the two doctors started advocating. 1986, as I said, Purdue Pharma releases OxyContin in response to the call for pain management. 1996, at the same time, the president of the American Pain Society urges treatment as a vital sign. Right after that, literally right after that, pill mills started showing up, primarily Ohio, the Appalachians, and eventually into Florida, where less than honorable individuals started opening up pill mills where doctors would write prescriptions and people would fill those prescriptions. It was an accelerator of the opiate crisis. The pill mills in the South were an accelerator of the opiate crisis back then. 1998 and 99, the VA and JACO adopt pain as the fifth vital sign. Now, I've been through some medical stuff, and my wife's a retired nurse. It drives me crazy when a doctor says to me, what's the pain on a scale of 1 to 10, right? Now, I'm not being critical here, but you have to ask yourself, what were we thinking of? That we would equate pain with not breathing or bleeding out. But that's what they did. It was a vital sign. So every time you went to the doctor's or you went into an emergency room, so what do you think an addicted individuals addicted to OxyContin said? What's your pain scale? 47.5. I can't stand it. I need more medication. What did they do? Because JACO and the organizations, they wrote more prescriptions. The pill mills in the South, when you read the book done by Dopesick and Dreamland, they took over the market. Two brothers got indicted, in fact, as a result of that. In a $500 million business in Florida, bad prescriptions coming in, people traveling as far away as Virginia, New Jersey, traveling to Florida to pick up pills that go back. And then became involved in the distribution of the pills because they're addicted. They need the money. Their Medicare and Medicaid would only cover so much, and now they're starting to traffic in the pill trade. 2001 was the beginning of a wake-up call. The state of Washington, for whatever reason, someone in the workman's comp office took notice that many people who were on workman's comp were dying of pharmaceutical pill overdoses, and they started digging into it. It was like the first time that somebody stuck their head up and said, this doesn't sound right. 2007, 3 executives at Purdue Pharma plead guilty to misdemeanor charges based upon the false, aggressive advertising of OxyContin. A $634 million fine. A lot of money. Didn't knock them off the blocks though. They kept going. Around the mid-2000s, a group from the city of Jalisco in Mexico, it's a city in central Mexico, a group of individuals from that location started trafficking heroin into the United States, unrelated to what was going on with OxyContin, unrelated to any conversation with Farmer Purdue about how can we take the place of pills. And I'll tell you, Gloria talked about, I was the police chief in Rutland for 3 years, from 2012 to 2015. I saw this firsthand in Rutland. I saw when powdered heroin hit the city and the damage it did to the city. Because what started to happen is people in the medical community started to realize that we had a real serious problem with OxyContin and some of the other narcotic-based painkillers. And people started cutting down on it. They started putting protocols in place. In fact, in the state of Ohio, they were the first state in 2011 to outlaw pill mills. And in Florida at the time, they actually made, and I'm not a tax lawyer, but they actually made tax incentives for individuals to open up pill mills. Of course, they didn't call them pill mills. They called them pain clinics. And two brothers, Chris and Jeff George, there's actually a documentary out on this, which is fascinating to watch. $500 million business. They opened up franchises of pain clinics to deal with pain. People were coming as far away from, as I said, New Jersey, Virginia, traveling to Florida to pain clinics to obtain pharmaceutical medication. 2014, one of those tipping point moments, right, that always happens in these situations. Actor Philip Seymour Hoffman died of an overdose. Do you remember this? National attention to the issue. And people started saying, you know, we got to think about what we're doing with this medication. So we started contracting, cutting down on, being more careful about writing prescriptions, harder to get prescriptions. What used to be getting 50 tablets of Oxycontin, you know, you would get maybe 5 to 10 pills. So what happens? I think that's going to solve the problem. There's an entire population in the country addicted. So what does the Mexican cartels do? Got to fill that void. Flood the country with powdered heroin. As I told you, I saw this in Rutland. In Rutland County, my first year I was there in 2012, we were giving out over, my memory tells me, don't hold me to this, but I think I'm right. We had given out in 1 year in Rutland County 35,000 doses of Oxycontin. 35,000 doses. Even taking into consideration that Rutland Hospital is a cancer center. I'm sitting at my desk as the chief of police seeing the damage being done to the community going, 35,000? That's enough pills for half the county. Medication. What are we doing? We started seeing powdered cocaine, or excuse me, heroin hit the streets. And there was an investigation done of a group of organized crime individuals. Now, when I say organized crime, don't go back to The Godfather. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about individuals that are organized who are committing crime. So let me just qualify that. We saw some individuals from the Long Island area who, why Burlington Vermont? Well, they skied to Killington. They were less than honest brokers, and they saw an opportunity, bought a couple houses in Rutland City, started running powdered heroin into the city, and the addiction took off. Now that was powdered heroin that wasn't laced with things like fentanyl and other cutting agents. Came into the city and we started seeing those things come. And again, I want to emphasize this to you. The business model is very simple. It's supply and demand. If there's a demand, and the demand is different than, I drive Subarus in my family, the most registered car in the state of Vermont. There's a demand for Subarus. Now, my wife's addicted to Subarus, but I'm not. But you don't get addicted to a car. But there's a demand for Subarus in Vermont. What happens? How many dealerships in Vermont sell Subarus? There's a supply. Drug addiction is much different. It's a naturally built-in demand. So the demand was there and it was filled. Then we went to synthetic opioids. Powdered heroin, the organizations, and I'm going to show you a slide in just a second. The third rendition of the opiate crisis is what we're dealing with now. It's the synthetic opioid trade, which is basically fentanyl. When I interviewed some of the undercover people that are working in the state for this presentation, just about all the heroin that they're seizing in the state is nothing but pure fentanyl. Fentanyl is 30% more addictive than heroin and 30% more addictive than Oxycontin. So we saw what happened back in the 80s and 2000s, and now we're dealing with fentanyl. Fentanyl, as the way it's purchased today, is not an entry drug for individuals, an initiation into drug use. And I want to talk about that in a little bit more. I want you just to let that sit with you for a minute. So why did the organized crime groups, primarily based out of Mexico, decide that we're going to switch from powdered opiates to synthetic fentanyl? And you've heard a little bit of this. You know, we're in what I refer to as the silly season, right? We're in the middle of a presidential campaign. Now, you've heard some of this, that we're going to cut down on the fentanyl coming across the border. I challenge anyone, and I'll talk about this in a minute. These organizations are very sophisticated. They make a lot of money. They've already figured out how to avoid the borders. And in a Reuters story that I just read, 3 reporters sitting in an apartment in Manhattan spent $3,600, never left their apartment, and got all the ingredients they needed to make $3 million worth of fentanyl. Never left their apartment. These groups are sophisticated. It's a high demand business, and they're going to find ways around. So I'm going to tell you, and you're going to hear me say this again, the work I've been doing since 1985, and again, I'm not an expert, but if we don't start cutting down on the demand, we're never going to get our arms around this problem. We have to have less users of the product in order for the supply side to be able to be dealt with through the criminal justice system. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. These networks are shifting as we speak. So when you look at this, don't get caught up in the nuance of Afghanistan and Latin America. Just take a look at the smuggling routes you have to go. Most of the opiate plants are coming out of Southeast and Southwest Asia. And so why did the organizations go to synthetic fentanyl? To cut down on the risk of loss. So if you're someone that was involved in the powder heroin trade, you would have to have some farmer in a country where corruption runs wild, where you've got to pay off politicians to survive, you've got to pay farmers to raise the plants, you got to pay farmers to harvest the plants, you got to pay farmers to scrape out the inner workings of the opium plant in order to get the product to make heroin. Then you got to transport it to a lab, you got to make it into heroin, then you got to load it onto some transportation to get it to the richest country in the world where you know you're driving addiction. There's a lot of risk for loss there. And if you're a businessman or a businesswoman and you've got a business that depends on a distribution network, you're going to cut down on your losses. I mean, Walmart, Amazon, they figured this out. They have figured out how to cut down on their losses, move product quicker, and be able to avoid any loss in the process. And that's exactly where we are in 2024 with fentanyl. Powdered heroin is almost passé now. Most of what you're seeing is manufactured synthetic fentanyl. And so, I don't want to be political, but I have to tell you, and I'm going to touch on a slide in a minute, one of our problems in this country is that we've been dealing with this problem since the 1800s. And we go from one knee-jerk reaction to the other with not a really good strategy on how to deal with this. So if somebody's telling you they're going to stop the drug problem by interdicting fentanyl at the border, these organizations are already 2 steps ahead of that. So good luck. If you think that's going to be an impact, good luck. Because what's driving, what did I say? Demand is driving the product. So what's the impact on Main Street in Vermont? The impact, historically, substance use disorder fentanyl is not a drug of initiation. What I mean by that is somebody just doesn't start using fentanyl for the first time and become addicted. Now, you'll hear war stories and maybe some cases where that actually happened. But most of the time, there's an initiation into the world of becoming addicted. There's an initiation, and you start out with some type of initiation drug. Back in my day, working undercover, it could be cocaine. Back then, when you saw heroin, We knew how to deal with heroin back then. You didn't have the overdoses you have today. Right now, we're really struggling to figure out how to deal with this crisis. And I'll talk a little bit more about my work with the governor's office in a few minutes. The current synthetic opiate, as I said, is not a drug of initiation. So what's happening, going back to the video that I showed you of the church in Burlington, and I'm working with other communities right now, and I don't want to trash it, and I'm not going to name them, but I'm working with other communities right now who are facing something very similar of antisocial behavior on the streets that's scaring the hell out of people. It's scaring the hell out of communities. It's starting to affect businesses because people, it's just uncomfortable to see it. And it isn't that we shouldn't be empathetic to individuals who are addicted. Because for anyone who says, well, they can stop anytime they want. I didn't start using heroin, so why should I be supporting them? Does not understand the cycle of addiction. They just don't understand it. Spend some time with someone in recovery. Some of the most fascinating conversations I've had are individuals who are in recovery. And so you heard a little bit of my background. And so the biggest learning lesson I got in this business was the 2 years I spent as the Commissioner of Corrections. I ended up at corrections because of a sexual scandal at the women's facility, and the prior commission was forced out by the governor. And I was asked to come in for just 120 days. But this thing, the pandemic hit, and I couldn't escape. I finally got paroled 2 years later. Little joke there. I got paroled a couple years later. But in the meantime, I spent time at the women's facility sitting down with women who, the majority of the folks that are there, the women are incarcerated, have a history of substance use disorder. And to hear the trauma in their background, it's amazing that they're even as far in life as they are. And so when you hear people talk about, there's a choice here, I would challenge that conversation. So what we're seeing right now with the synthetic fentanyl is that it's a smaller group of individuals that are using it. It's not like when cocaine and crack and some of the other illicit drugs were out there as the primary drug. It's a smaller group using it. It's more condensed, but it's so highly addictive, their behavior is becoming more obvious. The behavior that ends up tearing apart the social fiber of the community is starting to become more noticeable. And their behavior, in order to support a habit, is becoming more aggressive. You saw a little bit of that in the video. You know, the minister comes out and challenges that young lady. She's challenging the minister back. And I'll talk about accountability in a couple minutes. Let me talk a little bit about the connection of violence and criminality. The cost to support addiction. I want you to take a look at that second line. This is a very conservative estimate. It's about, right now in Vermont, to buy 10 bags of heroin is about $80. Some people have upwards, and the undercover people tell me this is a conservative figure, a 50 bag a day habit. That's $400 a day, times 365. That means you got to commit $146,000 in crime a year, one person, to support your habit. Now, you're going to hear people talk about, again, it is silly season, it's election time. You're going to hear a lot of people talk crime's up, crime's down, crime's out of control, no, crime's not that bad. Here's the problem with fentanyl addiction. A lot of this crime is not reported because it's in her family. I have people from my days in Rutland that are very close to me, that I developed relationships with, that have lost family members to criminality around addiction. Had several members of extended family addicted to when powder heroin was on the move. These were grandchildren of parents that I got to know, grandparents that I got to know fairly well. These grandchildren cleaned their house out of antiques, valuable silver products, gold products, cleaned their house out. You think they're gonna call the police? Nah. That only came out over a conversation over coffee. So a lot of the crime that's occurring, the social working apart of the fiber in the community, a lot of times isn't reported. In Burlington, the merchants aren't even calling the police anymore because they can't respond. So that data is not getting captured, which is an important piece to put in context the damage being done to the communities. So who becomes the victim of crime? I just described it to you. Now there is violence that goes with this, and I want to talk about that in just a second. There is violence that goes with it. But this social fiber that is damaging the community, it goes to all aspects of the community. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about the public safety enhancement team that the governor stood up about 2 years ago at the end in just a few minutes. But the work I'm doing, I'm on the ground in several communities in Vermont. And you're seeing, for example, in one community, post-pandemic, 58% of the children in junior high and high school have missed 10 or more days of school unexcused. Think about that for a minute. In another community I'm working in, there's 75 kids in the junior high school and the high school that are homeless, that have parents that are struggling with either mental health and or substance use disorder, who are going to be moving out of motels soon and have to start camping or find other arrangements. So one of the interviews that was done with one of the kids is, what's going to happen when you lose your housing? Well, my mom and I are going to camp. Computer access to do homework? Mentors to help them with homework? What's happening now is going to be a big bill to pay moving forward, is my point. So violence. Look, the core of the substance use disorder is supplying product to individuals who are addicted. And there's big money to be made in it. Right here, not far from where we're sitting right now. 2 years ago, there was a homicide of a 17-year-old kid from Holyoke, Massachusetts. Dumped on Danny Mountain Road, shot point blank in the chest. And if you read the newspaper stories, you know as much as I do about the investigation. But it was in retaliation for something that that kid supposedly did. What used to be for distribution in Vermont, back in the day, individuals who were involved in trafficking of drugs, cocaine, in my day undercover, back in the 80s and 90s, people would travel to source cities and then come back with the product. What's happening now is that because the groups have gotten sophisticated, the distribution is sophisticated. There's source cities that act like Amazon's distribution centers, and couriers come to Vermont. And they come here with a culture of violence that we're not used to. There's a homicide in St. Johnsbury where a 15-year-old kid shot a woman over a drug deal on the side of a school. So what was the violence far away is now violence close by. Now look, I'm not trying to scare you. Just don't go out and buy fentanyl and you'll be okay. I'm saying that a little facetious. But if one of your children get messed up in this and get involved in this, that culture is here now. And it's very challenging. You saw the legislature last year and the year before change the statute on charging juveniles with crimes. That's good. That's nice. I don't want to criticize any of my good friends who are legislators, but the demand is still there. And as long as the demand is here, these young entrepreneurs are coming with guns. And they're going to continue coming with guns until we do something about the demand. And we've been messing with this for a very long time. Well, let me move to wrapping this up. Here is, this is substance abuse, substances involved in opiate-related fatalities in Vermont up until 2023. See the gray line that spikes up to 100%? That's fentanyl. Remember what I told you about? All of a sudden, organizations started flooding America with fentanyl, Here it is in Vermont, right here. Starting in about 2017 and 2018. But now, the drug supply is so toxic with fentanyl that we're starting to see most of the drug products containing fentanyl. So, again, a little bit of perspective here. Ebb and flow of public policy. I promised myself that I would not get too overboard on this, but I get really, really frustrated. I mean, I've been doing this work since 1985, and over here we want to legalize, and over here we want to send everybody to jail. But we don't want to build any more jails. But you know what? We don't want to hold anybody accountable over here for their behavior. And so we ebb and flow on policy over the last 30, 40 years. Well, we got the war on drugs. And you still hear people on the left-hand side of the occasion want to refer to war on drugs. For the last 10 years, I have not once heard a respectable law enforcement leader use that term. Folks that want to attack the criminal justice system, its involvement in the substance disorder, we'll talk about it all the time. You'll hear them. And again, I don't know if anybody's a card-carrying member of the ACLU, so I'll be gentle on this. But you'll hear the head of the ACLU in Vermont often refer to the war on drugs. There hasn't been a war on drugs in 30 years in Vermont. But we switch from one thing to another. It's almost schizophrenic the way we go. We're now going to take a look at safe injection sites in Burlington. I'm not saying that maybe the science behind that would work. But you tell me what that's going to do for the demand side of the equation. How are we going to cut down on the number of people that are using drugs? The need for better data and better use of that data is starting to come to light in Vermont. And I'll show you here. These slides are from Vermont does social autopsies. So these are individuals who have died of overdoses, who the health department with other elements inside the Agency of Human Services, mental health, DCF, Medicaid, Medicare, they go back and they take a look at individuals. And so what you're seeing on the left is the number of interactions that individuals had with different state agencies. So the blue, the smaller, is corrections. So they were incarcerated one or more times prior to dying. Public safety is the taller of the bars. They're interacting with law enforcement all the time. And then the other one is Siren, which is the database that EMS uses to track activity in the state that the health department collects. So we've got individuals prior to dying coming into corrections, interacting with public safety, and being met by EMS, but they're still dying of overdoses. Now this data is a little bit old, and this is my frustration. It goes back to 21. And I've been pretty vocal about this, both in my consultant role and when I was a commissioner of corrections. I don't need to know what was done 3 years ago. I need to know what was done 3 weeks ago. Because that's part of what our challenge is, being able to quickly react to resources being applied to lessen the harm to individuals and communities. And we don't quite have that data yet. On the right-hand side is a little bit of information about individuals interacting with individual agencies. The health access, which within Human Services is the one that administers Medicaid in the state, provides Dr. Dinosaur and other health care. Children and families, better known as DCF. Mental health. And as you can see, they're interacting with all these agencies. And this is one of the things that we're starting to discover. Even inside AHS, which is the mothership for corrections, health access, DCF, mental health, DAL, which is disability, independent living. These are commissioners. I was one of those commissioners. Met every Monday with the secretary. We don't even know amongst ourselves what's going on, let alone going out into the communities to better understand how to wrap services around people who are being harmed by addiction. So 2 years ago, Governor Scott said to his leadership team, you know what, we did quite a job on the pandemic. And I will tell you, being one of the commissioners, working for the governor when that was going down, we were the only correctional system in the country not to lose an incarcerated individual or a staff member to the virus. Nothing I did. Matter of fact, the entire time during the pandemic, I ran corrections. I was sitting in Don Keelan's office at a desk. That's where I ran corrections from. It's because of the way we use data. And we were reacting within hours. If there was community spread in Springfield, and I have a facility in Springfield, we immediately mobilized the troops, and that place started smelling like Clorox. Because we would go to war to get that place locked down, cleaned up, making sure that the virus wasn't spreading. Because if a virus spreads inside a facility, a prison, that's like a cruise ship. You're not going to stop it. And we had several breakouts. There was a lot of nights I'm laying in bed wondering if I woke up in the morning and said, we lost 2 incarcerated people overnight. Or we lost a staff member to the virus. The governor challenged his team to take a look at the model we used. Matter of fact, some of you, I think, was online with Mike Pichek today for a conversation with Mike Pichek. If you remember, Mike Pichek would show up every day with the governor, and they would have a press conference, and the governor would talk about what's going on, and Pichek would deliver data. You remember this. He wasn't the treasurer at the time. He was the commissioner of banking and insurance, or financial regulation, I'm sorry. And Pichek would give the data. Well, that data was coming from a few people in digital services who were using AI to do modeling of behavior. And we were staying ahead of that. And the governor challenged the staff to take a look at this. And so every Wednesday, leadership of state government meet, and they talk about what's going on in the last week in the state. I was asked to come back as a consultant to the project, and we've worked in the communities of Bennington, Springfield, and Brattleboro so far. We're moving to St. Johnsbury next. I'm getting done because I don't retire well. I was supposed to retire 15 years ago, and I just don't do it well. As I was saying to Andrew McKeever a while ago, he says he's retired, but he's still working. I know that deal. We're going on to St. Johnsbury next. And what is our focus? We're trying to respond to the opioid crisis and the violence by merging public safety and public health together. And in coordination, bringing coordination to these programs. This is what the Wednesday meeting looks like. This is a slide from Brattleboro. We're mapping data that shows the chaos that may be in the community, the kind of incidents that occur. That's a side-by-side comparison. The data is less important. I'm trying to show you what the model is that we're following. So when you look back here, we're taking a look at Brattleboro. We'll take a look at what the activity is. Over to the right, it's mapped. So we start figuring out place-based data so we can help Brattleboro Police Department and the social services agencies on the ground in Brattleboro to work on a given issue in a given area. Now, what we've also been able to do through data is identify individuals who are high users of the system. Remember that slide about the social autopsy? We're taking that to the ground now. And I'll give you this in Brattleboro. We identified 20 individuals who over the last 3 years accounted for 5% of all the calls for police service. And only 7% of those calls had anything to do with criminal justice. So what have we been doing for the last several years? We're applying the wrong tool off the tool belt to deal with a problem that the police are not geared to deal with. That's why you're starting to see police agencies around the state embed liaisons, clinician liaisons inside their agencies to start doing intervention in these situations and try to move people to a place where they're doing less harm to themselves and in the end doing less harm to the community. I do want to wrap this up with questions, and I know it's about 25 of. I was at a meeting of the judiciary a week ago because the judiciary is starting to take a look at this as well. They're trying to figure out an intercept model where judges can intercept behavior and offload people in the system for a better outcome instead of sentencing them to probation and have the corrections department try to supervise someone with complicated issues, such as personality disorders is overlaid by a substance use disorder, who act out violent once in a while, trying to figure out ways to be able to offload people from the system to get better outcomes. And I heard somebody who's in recovery make this statement, which I want to end the conversation on this. Empathy without accountability is enabling. What we've done in this state over the last 15 or 20 years in criminal justice reform is taking accountability out of the system. We need to be empathetic to folks, but we need to hold them accountable to their behavior. Urinating in a public park is not acceptable. Not acceptable. Harassing someone at a parking meter for change is not acceptable. That's a social norm in a community that we need to get back to in order for us to right the ship on accountability and start bringing accountability into the conversation. Now, I'm going to tell you, if there was a public health person here, maybe there is, they're going to argue with me about this. And good luck trying to win the argument, because I've been doing this since 1985. Empathy without accountability is enabling. And so I'm going to end that there. There's a lot more I could have said tonight. I'm going to open it up to questions. And I'll finally say this for the last time. It's a very simple business. Supply, demand. As long as there's demand, there's going to be a supply. And if we don't end up focusing on the supply side of this and cut down on the number of folks that are using, we're going to be, I won't be around for this, but we've been talking about it since 1864. China and Britain went to war over it in the 1800s. Demand is driving this, and the work that needs to be done is better building relationships between public safety and public health to have better outcomes. So I'm gonna stop there and open it up to questions. Did I scare the hell out of you? Sir.
You talked about the supply and demand. Do they look at the manufacturing aspect of it as well and the making it?
They do. They do. So the question was, do they look at the manufacturing side of it? So there was recently an article that came out from the CDC that was an article, it was a column by the director of the CDC, who talked about, for example, fentanyl comes either powdered or in pills, right? So that is the danger of initiation. I should have said this earlier because it just popped in my head. That's the dangers of initiation into the use of fentanyl. If you're a high school kid and you're at a party and there's a lot of alcohol flowing, somebody slides you a pill, I mean, that could be a fentanyl pill that was black market and is very dangerous. So in that column that the director of the CDC wrote, he talked about a more elaborate strategy to deal with the manufacturing of fentanyl, and what he talked about is exactly what he talked about. Better regulation of the companies that make the pill presses, better regulation through the Postal Service, better regulation on monitoring, shipping, more engagement of the shipping companies, because with the fentanyl now, a lot of this stuff, as I told you, with the Roder story, right? They sat in an apartment in Manhattan and got shipped to them what they needed for drugs. So there is an emphasis on the enforcement side to take a look at that, but I will just warn people that that's not the secret answer either, because these outfits and organizations will adjust on the fly.
I understand the pills that are leaving those facilities are, but are the ingredients used to make those pills, when they're not mixed all together,
The precursors,
is it illegal to purchase those ingredients?
it is. And the story I told you about where they obtained it, interesting conversations where they went online, dark web, went online, engaged conversations. You ever have phone, I mean, everybody gets these phone calls now, telemarketers, right? And the distribution centers primarily, for the precursor chemicals, are primarily in China. And there's deep markets where they're selling the precursors and shipping them. So,
you talk about the need to reduce demand, but you indicate that the entry point is not the fentanyl. What are the entry points today in today's world?
the entry points of the drugs coming into the country?
No, the entry points of someone getting addicted.
Yeah.
To start the addiction scenario.
I want to be careful because I'm really not an expert on this, but I would say to you that the entry points, as I described to you, especially with the pills around fentanyl, could be as a teenager at a party. Alcohol. And the losing of that social control that comes with that type of environment. That could be an entry point. One of the things that, as I researched for this, that I saw that's a little concerning, and again, I said we could spend a college semester talking about this. Some of the organizations are starting to adjust already to knowing that eventually this conversation will cut down on the fentanyl. So they're now back to starting to get back into the cocaine world of manufacturing cocaine and sending it. So if that happens, entry points will get a little easier. You follow my reason? Because people are less intimidated by cocaine than they are by what is now known as fentanyl or heroin. So those entry points, one of the interesting articles that, one of the interesting things I'm seeing personally in Vermont is that we now know from the data we're collecting, the individuals that are using fentanyl, it isn't as big as a crowd as you think it would have been, but it's a heavy use of that. And so there's an opportunity here to try to make a dent in that behavior and try to prevent other people from entering that world. That makes sense. Other questions? Sorry. Sure.
Is there a statistic on the relapse rate of people that go through treatment and just actually stay on, or that don't, I guess?
There is a statistic, but I don't know, to be honest with you. So his question was, because we don't have a microphone to go around, is there a statistic on relapsing, this is my term, relapsing, when someone comes out of treatment? And there is a statistic. And I will tell you from my days at corrections as the corrections commissioner, you know, I said this openly, and I think corrections does it a lot better now. But one of the things I discovered was we did a very poor job transitioning people from facilities back to the community. A lot of these folks have prior history of addiction. In fact, corrections has a very robust internal. People who are incarcerated are being treated medically with medication for addiction. And we did a poor job. In my second year at corrections, I think the number was we lost 6 people who left facilities and within a couple of weeks of being out, overdosed and died. Goes back to the social autopsy. There is a history of relapse, especially with the opiates. I just don't know what the percentage is, but I got to put this out here, and you didn't ask this, but you must be wired in with me because this is one of my pet peeves. We are not making the kind of effort we should on treatment when we're sending people to treatment for 10 days. They're barely detoxed in 10 days. And we're sending people to treatment for 10 days that expect them to go back, I refer to it, go back to the pond they came from, the environment they came from, because it's a big effect on addiction, and expect that they're going to do okay. So I'll give you just an example to finish your question. I speak often with somebody who's in recovery in Brattleboro, because I just kind of a way for me to gauge what I'm thinking. That person relapsed 6 times before they became fully, what they refer to as full recovery. Net.
In any population, you're going to have people with the DNA for addictive disorders, whether it's alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, or compulsive, washing your hands all the time, things like that. You're never going to have a demand of zero because people are just, it's in their system, right?
I agree with your concept, 100%. What I didn't get to say because we were running out of time is that we have spent in the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of time on harm reduction to the individual. You'll hear people talk about harm reduction because what you're trying to do, the difference between, alcohol is a slow killer, right? And I don't want to downplay the amount of damage alcohol does in our society. I'm not doing that. That's a slow killer. The quicker way of killing yourself is becoming involved with fentanyl, right? And so the efforts that have been put in, especially post-pandemic, is to focus on harm reduction to the individual. That's why police officers are carrying Narcan. We got Narcans in vending machines. But what we haven't focused in on that is the harm that's being done to communities as a result of us being willing to accept the behavior of addicted individuals. So the difference with someone that may have compulsive behavior around have to keep their hands clean or they have a cigarette habit, yeah, they're costing us money. Someone who smokes costing us money in healthcare, no two ways around it. But they are not out urinating in public places because they smoke cigarettes and causing that damage socially, ripping the social fiber apart in the community. I know I may have danced around your question.
Could a person who is predisposed to like alcohol or become an alcoholic, is that the same kind of person that could be predisposed to try the fentanyl?
I don't know the answer to that. I would guess, but I don't want to be inaccurate. I don't disagree with fentanyl has completely changed the game simply because of the addictive nature of the product. So if you ask me that question about cocaine, I would say yes, you're 100% right. I just don't know about fentanyl because of the addictive nature of the product.
Thank you.
No questions for you. Next.
Jim, you mentioned we're in the third stage, or you gave it, you described it that way. Is there a fourth stage? Are the experts in your field forecasting what's going to come next after what we want, and once we get through this stage, if we ever get through?
What they are talking about, Don, is that in all these cycles, put opiates off to the side for a minute. Let me frame this by saying this. Crack cocaine ran a cycle. It went through a cycle, right? And then it cycled out. Methamphetamine went through a cycle and then it cycled out. Cocaine, powdered cocaine, went through a cycle and then it cycled out. What they're seeing with fentanyl is that, again, it's so addictive that they don't see it cycling out amongst the group of users. So I don't hear anybody talking about the fourth wave of the opiate crisis. What I do hear people talking about is they're starting to see things like methamphetamine and cocaine start to raise its ugly head again. So the undercover people, when I interviewed them, talked about they're starting to see those products show up in the circle of people who are involved with fentanyl. Now what that means, who knows? Ma'am.
It sounds like harm reduction keeps users alive and potentially makes a bigger demand. What are the ways to reduce the demand?
So you said it sounds like to you that harm reduction drives bigger harm to the community? Is that your premise of the question? No, I'm sorry.
I guess indirectly, but you had made the point that the number of deaths has declined slightly.
Correct.
But you think that's because of harm reduction.
That's correct.
Use is probably actually higher.
Or consistent, higher or consistent.
So, like harm reduction isn't having an impact on the demand.
Because we're doing harm reduction only focused on the individual who's addicted.
But that's my question.
Right. Yeah, well, first of all, in the communities that I've seen where, like, the communities just got their hands in the air, they've had enough, Burlington, Brattleboro, we have to bring some level of accountability back. That's why I put that slide up. I thought that was the greatest quote I've heard in a long time. This is from a guy who's in recovery. Now, I've talked to a lot of people in recovery. If you talk to somebody in recovery, they will tell you within the first 5 minutes of the conversation, every single time, they will bring up the word accountability. And they know that when they first went into treatment or they tried to stop using, they needed someone to hold them accountable until they were strong enough to be accountable themselves. What I'm suggesting, and I would get a lot of pushback from people in the public health field, and I would love to have a coffee and have this conversation with them, is that there is social norming in a community, what's acceptable and not acceptable. I did a fair amount of work in Baltimore when I was working in Washington, and it always amazed me that you'd be on this side of the street, and there's gunfire, heroin being trafficked down street corners, and you cross the street, and you could leave $1,000 in your front seat of your car, being a little facetious there. $1,000 in the front seat of your car for a week and it'd still be there. Why? Because they didn't accept that behavior. And so when I talk about accountability, that's what I'm talking about. Violating social norms in a community or committing a crime, addiction is not an excuse for that. And we've created excuses for individuals as a result, and it doesn't move them along the path of recovery. Am I making sense to you? So we focus so much on harm reduction of the individual that we forgot about the harm to the community, and now you're starting to see some of the stuff that's happening in communities, which is really damaging the communities. Friday night, they had a story with a merchant on Church Street in Burlington. And again, I don't want to pick on Burlington, because they're not the only ones dealing with this. This woman's run a business on Church Street. I don't want to tell the story. They're interviewed. She's in tears. Her sales are down going on 40%. Foot traffic has disappeared. So we let people urinate on Church Street because, they're addicted. That behavior is not acceptable. We have to start driving that point home to people. So as I work with these communities, I'm telling community leaders, that behavior is not acceptable. And however you get that message across to the individual, you've got to do it. Because it's not acceptable to do that. It's not acceptable to go through people's cars. It's not acceptable to damage somebody's property. It's not acceptable to harass somebody at a parking meter for money. It may not be illegal, but it's not acceptable. It's not a social norm in our community. So, can you tell that's a passionate part of how I think? Go ahead.
You said when you talk with the communities, you say however you need to get that across.
Right.
Like what, are
So-
you thinking enforcement?
Yeah, maybe.
Anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you take a look at it, I encourage you when you leave here, Google Portland, Oregon, and watch what they've gone through over the last 5 years. They went all the way to the left of no enforcement at all. Guess what they did? They had made small possessions of all drugs illegal. Guess what? Now they're over here. This goes back to that arrow I showed you, that this nuance of almost being in a schizophrenic thought process about left or right. And so, whatever it takes to hold them accountable. So what I suggest to communities in the consulting I'm doing with them, first of all, every one of these communities have outreach. One of the things that we're really experimenting with, historically, if you had somebody that was addicted in your family and you're looking for treatment, you would go call 211, go to the Vermont Health Department website, and I've driven people in state government crazy on this. I would hear people that are working in this space in state government say, well, we have information at 211, they call 211. Oh, let me get this straight. There's a young man sitting in the alley about ready to push the pusher on the needle in his arm, and he's going to say, you know what, I better check 211 to find out if this is good for me or not. We need to get people out to them, and in that process of doing outreach, we need to start the bar for what the behavior that this community is going to accept. We want to help you. It's called focused deterrence, well-researched model. We want to help you, but here's the rules. If you can't find it, you can't follow the rules, here's the consequence. That may mean arresting them, yes. And I know some of my public health, social service friends who were in the room would fly out of their chair when I just said that. That's exactly what I'm saying. There has to be a consequence for behavior. You don't accept it from your children, and we shouldn't accept it from people who are affected. We should help them out. We should have some empathy. Beth.
Jim, so.
See, I had to pay people to come tonight. So,
this came from somebody in recovery also, and I'm reading in the paper how there's fentanyl, there's overdoses and things like that. So this person in recovery said that would drive them to that drug. Like that's got to be a good drug if people are dying. I won't be that dumb.
right.
And so, do you see that?
Absolutely.
This heroin's okay, but that has got to be really good.
So, you heard it in the video, right? The pastor confronts the woman, and there's this exchange about Jesus. I'm a practicing Catholic, but I guess my priest would tell me that Jesus talks to me once in a while. I guess he talks to me once in a while. But I don't think Jesus is telling them it's okay to do drugs, right? And so you saw that pushback that woman gave the pastor. Oh no, Jesus says this is okay. And I don't think so. But again, they have to have an incentive. Individuals that are addicted have to have some type of incentive to get off that train, to get off that treadmill they've been on. And so for people I talk to who are in recovery, it's somebody who's done, somebody that's impactful in their life. Sometimes it's the law. The guy I talked to once in a while served a federal jail sentence. That got his attention, right? He's not going back. He doesn't want to spend any more time away from his family. He doesn't want to hurt his family anymore. So there is, for folks who are using, the more powerful the drug, the more attractive it is.
And I just wanted to, you were talking about outreach. Are you familiar with the Schenectady City Mission in New York?
Mm-hmm.
They have, where do they call them? But anyhow, they go into the city of Schenectady under the bridges,
Mm-hmm.
bring sandwiches, things like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Sometimes it takes years
Exactly.
to get that.
Exactly. So in one community I'm working in, Beth, there are, this is going to start to show me a little bit of my frustration. Don hears this every day at lunchtime. There's one community I'm working that has 8 outreach teams. 8. Funded by various funds, nonprofit outreach teams. Not one of them work together. One focuses on mental health, another one focuses on substance use, another one focuses on when someone overdoses, but no one goes out together to build that relationship with the individual, because that's going to be the influencer, to eventually get them to a point. Take them to go get a shower, give them a little bit of self-esteem, but hold them accountable for what they're doing in the community. They're damaging the fiber of our communities, for sure. So the focus of the Governor's Public Safety Enhancement Team has really been on creating these outreach teams, which has been a little challenging because people who've been in the business for a while think still that you're a state service, and if you need it, drive to the office, state office building, rap on the window and get the service. It doesn't work that way any longer. We have to change our model of delivery. And so that's something we've been working on in the Governor's Task Force. I'll take one more.
Jim, I'm not familiar with your, what you talk about in leadership. I assume that you're not tying that into the leadership that you've learned from your career in police work and narcotics, or is there?
My leadership consulting I do, it's all experience, right? To answer your question, yes, because I've had the opportunity to have my phone ring and say, we have a problem here, can you come see what you can do about it? So I actually do some work outside of Vermont right now with the Justice Department, where we're doing that very work in a police department in New Jersey, and we're helping them build a cadre of leaders inside the department. So I spend a lot of time coaching and counseling individuals. Is that what you were asking?